Sometimes the greatest pain in family is not in the things they say, but in the moments they refuse to let you in. Doors close in many ways, quietly, with a polite smile, or loudly, with a slam. But for Mother, the loudest sound is the silence on the other side. Mary Thompson had always believed her family's gatherings were sacred. She carried those nights in her bones, Christmases with carols by the piano, Thanksgivings where her husband's laugh filled the house, birthdays where children ran between legs with frosting on their cheeks. These were the walls she built, the traditions she nurtured, the table she kept open even when money was tight. So when her youngest son Daniel invited her to his special dinner, Mary pressed her only emerald scarf, the one her late husband had given her on their 30th anniversary. She told herself it's his big night. He'll want his mother there. She looked in the mirror, smoothed her silver hair back, and whispered as if rehearsing a blessing, "I'm proud of you, Danny. I always have been." The restaurant was brighter than any place she'd walked into in years. Chandeliers hung like upside-down wedding cakes, the floor gleamed like polished ice. A doorman, stiff in a navy uniform, guided her through the glass entryway. Mary clutched her handbag against her side, steadying herself on heels she hadn't worn since Emily's wedding. She spotted Daniel across the room, his back straight in a tailored suit, his arm casually placed around Sophie's waist. Sophie, young, sharp, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, whispered something, and Daniel laughed, the kind of laugh Mary hadn't heard since he was 12. The kind of laugh that once echoed when he was chasing fireflies in their backyard. For a fleeting moment, Mary smiled. That was her boy. "Mrs. Thompson?" The hostess, holding a sleek tablet, blocked her path. "Are you here for the Mercer Group dinner?" Mary nodded. "Yes, I'm Daniel's mother." The hostess glanced at the screen, then at Mary. Her polite smile twitched. "I'm afraid I don't see your name here." Mary blinked. "There must be a mistake. I was invited. This is my son's event." The hostess leaned closer, voice lowered. "Ma'am, I'll have to confirm with Mr. Mercer. Would you mind waiting by the entrance?" Mary's cheeks warmed. Around her polished men and women passed, their perfumes and colognes mixing like an orchestra. She stepped aside, clutching her scarf. Mistake, that's all she told herself. But when Daniel noticed her, his smile faltered. He whispered something to Sophie. Sophie's lips curled, and then she strode across the floor with the sharp precision of heels that claimed territory. "Mary," Sophie said, her voice wrapped in silk and steel. "You shouldn't have come." Mary stiffened. "What do you mean Daniel invited me?" Sophie's eyes flicked toward Daniel, then back. "This is a business celebration. It's not family appropriate. Daniel didn't want you to feel out of place." The words landed heavier than a slap. "Out of place?" Mary repeated. She turned to Daniel, who still hadn't moved from his table. He raised his glass, deliberately not meeting her eyes. "You'll understand, won't you?" Sophie continued. "These people, well, they're important to his career. It's best if you—" She gestured toward the door, as though sweeping crumbs from a tablecloth. Mary's throat closed. For 60 years, she had been the one making sure no child of hers ever felt unwanted at any table. She had given up her college degree when she became pregnant with her firstborn. She had worked double shifts at the diner when Daniel was accepted into college, selling her wedding china to pay his first tuition bill. And now here she stood, a guest unwelcome at a feast she had helped build. "I see," Mary whispered. Her voice trembled, but she straightened her back. She would not let them see her break. The hostess, watching uncomfortably from the podium, murmured, "Ma'am, I can arrange a cab?" "No." Mary shook her head. She lifted her chin as if the scarf around her neck had become armor. "I'll walk." She turned toward the glass doors. Her reflection stared back. A woman with tired eyes, silver hair, and a dignity no one in the room seemed able to recognize. Behind her, laughter rose like clinking coins. She stepped outside into the chill of the evening, the city's neon lights buzzing above her. On the sidewalk, she pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady the tremor in her heart. Pedestrians hurried past, none noticing the woman in emerald scarf who had just been dismissed by her own flesh and blood. She wanted to cry, but tears would give Sophie and Daniel too much power. Instead, Mary inhaled deeply, her breath visible in the night air. "They shut the door on me," she thought. "But I am still standing." That walk home felt longer than any road she had taken. Every step echoed with memory. Carrying Daniel's backpack when he was too tired after Little League, staying up past midnight sewing Emily's prom dress, holding her husband's hand in the hospital when his breath came shallow and final. She had done everything for family, believing it was the one place no door would ever close. Yet tonight proved her wrong. When she reached her small house, the one filled with photographs that no one seemed to notice anymore, Mary slid her shoes off by the door and sat in the quiet living room. The clock ticked loudly, each second like a drumbeat of solitude. On the mantel was a photo of Daniel at his college graduation, his smile wide, his arm looped around her shoulder. Beneath it, her husband's old watch lay still, the hands forever frozen at the moment the battery died years ago. Mary touched the photo frame, her fingers trembling. How did we come to this? And yet, beneath the humiliation, a seed of something else stirred. Not anger, not even grief, but a whisper of truth she had ignored for too long. If your own children can close the door on you, then perhaps it's time to build doors of your own. She sat there for a long while, the city's distant hum outside her window, the scarf still draped around her shoulders. And in that silence, Mary Thompson, 60 years old, widow, mother of three, realized this night would not just be remembered as the evening her son shut her out. It would be remembered as the night she began to let herself in. Mary awoke the next morning with the heaviness of the night before still pressing against her chest. The house felt too quiet, too still, as if silence itself had taken residence in her living room. The scarf she had worn lay draped over the arm of her chair, a fallen banner after a lost battle. She walked into the kitchen, her slippers brushing against the tiled floor, and set water to boil. The kettle whistled into emptiness. No voices, no footsteps, no husband rustling the morning newspaper. Just the whisper of an old clock marking her solitude. Her mind returned, unwillingly, to her children. She thought of Daniel, his laugh echoing across a chandeliered room while she stood outside, unwanted. She thought of Emily, her eldest, who lived in Connecticut with her successful husband and rarely called except when she needed something signed for legal papers. And there was John, the middle child, the quiet one who had moved to Seattle years ago, always too busy with tech startups to come home. Mary touched the table, its surface worn from years of family meals, board games, homework sessions. I gave them everything I had, she thought. How did that turn into nothing? She remembered the first time she made a sacrifice for her children. She had been 21, holding Emily in her arms, when her college advisor told her she would lose her scholarship if she didn't return to classes by fall. Mary had looked down at Emily's tiny face, her eyes wide and trusting, and she knew her choice was already made. She gave up the scholarship and took a job at the diner instead. She never told her children what she'd lost, only what they had gained: security, milk in the fridge, and shoes for school. Years later, when John struggled in middle school, bullied for wearing secondhand clothes, she saved every extra tip to buy him a new jacket, something brand name, something that made him feel less invisible. She still remembered the way he smiled, standing taller as if a zipper could shield him from the world. And Daniel, her youngest, her baby. He had been born after her husband's health had begun to fail. The bills piled high, and Mary worked nights after teaching days, her body aching, her voice hoarse. She had whispered to herself in the darkness, "Just a little longer, Mary. Just hold on a little longer." She sold her mother's ring, the one piece of jewelry that held family history, to pay for Daniel's college application fees. She told herself it's only a ring, but a degree that will change his life forever. It did change his life, but perhaps not in the way she imagined. Mary poured herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sunlight creeping across the counter. The warmth felt distant, almost mocking. She remembered the day her husband, Michael, had died. The children had been grown then, scattered into their own lives, too busy to come home more than a few days for the funeral. It was Mary who sorted through his old books, Mary who sold the car to cover debts, Mary who stood at the graveside alone longer than anyone else. Her sacrifices had not been one grand gesture. They had been daily, quiet, invisible things: ironing shirts at midnight, skipping meals so her children could have seconds, selling heirlooms so tuition checks would clear. She had given not out of duty, but out of love. Love, she believed, was the most unbreakable bond in the world. But bonds, she was learning, could fray. She thought back to last summer when Emily had invited her to visit. Mary had been excited, baking pies for the trip, packing her best Sunday dress. But when she arrived, Emily's husband, Richard, had made a comment about keeping the visit short because they were entertaining important people. Mary had smiled politely, even as her heart sank. She was not the honored mother. She was an inconvenience in the home she had once sacrificed for. And John, his voice echoed faintly in memory. Mom, I can't talk now. I'm in a meeting. He always seemed to be in meetings. He sent money at Christmas, wired into her account, as if cash could substitute for presents. She had taught him as a boy that time was more valuable than money. But now he was a man who had none to give her. And Daniel had been her hope, the one she poured her last reserves into. The one she thought might always remember who she was, not just what she could provide. Last night shattered that illusion. Her tea had gone cold. She stared into the pale liquid as if it could answer the questions she was too afraid to voice. Was it all worth it? Did they forget what I gave? Did I raise children who cannot see me anymore? The sound of the mail slot clicking pulled her from her thoughts. Mary rose and shuffled to the door. A stack of envelopes lay scattered on the rug. Bills, flyers, another letter from the bank reminding her of mortgage options she couldn't afford. At the bottom of the pile was a photograph slipped in without a return address. It was a picture from decades ago, a classroom of smiling children, their faces bright, their hands holding up a banner that read, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." Mary remembered that day. It had been Teacher Appreciation Week. Her students, most of them from families who struggled like she did, had pooled coins to buy her flowers. She had cried when they handed her that banner. Now, as she held the photograph in her trembling hands, a thought stirred inside her. They remembered, at least someone remembered. She set the photo against the window where the light could touch it, and as she looked at those young faces preserved in time, Mary realized her life had not been for nothing. Her worth was not measured by whether Daniel invited her to a dinner table. Her worth lived in the lessons, the kindness, the sacrifices no one could erase. Still, the ache remained. Children she bore, fed, clothed, educated, they now carried her sacrifices like shadows they chose to forget. Shadows she could no longer ignore. Mary folded her arms on the kitchen table and let her head rest there, eyes closed. She thought of her husband's voice, low and steady, whispering during their hardest years, "You're stronger than you think, Mary." Perhaps she still was, because even though a door had closed, and even though the echoes of last night still stung like fresh wounds, Mary felt a quiet determination rise within her. She would not beg for a seat at Daniel's table again. She had built her life on giving, and maybe it was time she began to claim a little back for herself. The photograph gleamed in the sunbeam. The faces of her students smiled at her, as if urging her forward. Mary lifted her head, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself imagine, what if the next chapter of my life wasn't about them? What if it was about me? The following Sunday, Mary decided to do what she always did in moments of heaviness: cook. It was a ritual that tethered her to steadier times. She laid out flour on the counter, cracked eggs into a bowl, and began kneading dough for her homemade rolls. She told herself she would invite the children for a simple lunch. Not a banquet, not a gala, just family, just bread breaking at a table where everyone had once felt welcome. When she called, Emily answered first. Sunday. "Oh, Mom, I don't know. Richard's been planning a golf outing. Maybe we can stop by for a short while." Mary tried to smile through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart, even an hour is fine." John's call was harder. Static crackled in the background as he spoke from somewhere crowded. "Mom, I'm buried in work. The investors are in town, you understand, right?" Mary whispered yes, though she didn't understand, not fully. Finally, Daniel picked up. His voice was brisk. Clipped, "What is it, Mom?" "I'm making rolls. Come by for lunch. We'll sit together just like old times." There was a pause, muffled voices in the background. Then Daniel said, "We'll see. Sophie's busy this weekend. She's redecorating the condo." Mary closed her eyes. "Well, you're always welcome." He didn't answer, only muttered something about work before hanging up. By noon on Sunday, only Emily showed. She arrived alone, without her children, without Richard, wearing a sharp suit that seemed too stiff for her mother's worn kitchen chairs. She pushed papers across the table before Mary even set down the bread. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." Mary blinked. "The house?" "Yes." Emily tapped the stack of documents. It's getting too expensive for you. Taxes, maintenance, utilities. You shouldn't be living here alone at your age. Mary bristled. This is our home, your father's and mine, the place you grew up. Emily softened her tone, but her eyes stayed fixed, businesslike. I know, but it makes sense to sell. You'd get enough money to move into a smaller apartment, something easier. Daniel and John agree. Daniel and John, Mary repeated, her voice cracking. They've discussed this without me? Emily looked away. They're worried, Mom. You've had trouble keeping up with repairs, and it's not practical. Mary stared at her daughter, the woman she had once braided pigtails for. The little girl who used to beg for bedtime stories. Now she sat like a lawyer across a table, speaking of practicality as if history and love were debts to be erased. I don't want to sell, Mary said firmly. Not yet, Emily sighed. You're being sentimental. You can't hold on to a house forever. It's just bricks and wood. Mary's voice rose, sharper than she intended. This house is not bricks and wood. It is birthdays and Christmas mornings. It is your father's laugh in the hallway. It is where I became a mother. Emily's eyes flickered, softening for just a second, but then she straightened her shoulders. We'll talk again later. She stood, kissed her mother's cheek as if closing a transaction, and left. That evening Daniel called. His tone was cool, rehearsed. Mom, Emily probably mentioned the house. She's right, you can't keep it. Sophie and I could help you find a condo near us, something manageable. Mary felt the sting in her chest. Daniel, this house? Mom, he interrupted. You'll thank us later. It's not about what you want anymore. It's about what makes sense. The words sank deep, not about what you want anymore. Mary sat in the living room after the call, the shadows of evening stretching long across the walls. She looked around at the photographs, the worn sofa, the shelf where her husband's book still rested. To her children, this was property. To her, it was the last piece of herself. 2 days later, John sent an email, not a call, not a visit, just an email. Mom, the market's strong right now. Selling the house would give everyone peace of mind. We've even spoken with a realtor. Please consider this the best option for all of us. Mary read the message 3 times. Peace of mind. Whose peace of mind, she wondered. Surely not hers. For the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her shift. The sacrifices she had made were invisible, and now the very foundation she had built for them. The house that sheltered their laughter, their tears, their dreams, was being stripped away, brick by her own children. Mary closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. She thought of her student's photograph by the window, the banner declaring, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." Those children had seen her. They had known her worth. But her own family, they saw only an aging woman, a financial liability, a piece of real estate to liquidate. The cracks in her family were no longer hairline fractures. They were widening, splitting open, threatening to collapse everything she had believed unbreakable. And as she sat in the dim kitchen light, Mary whispered aloud what she had been too afraid to admit. They don't see me anymore. The week after the conversations about the house, Mary tried to busy herself with chores. She raked the leaves that had scattered across the yard, even though her back ached. She polished the wood of the banister until it gleamed. She cooked meals for one, portioning them into containers she barely touched. Anything to quiet the noise in her mind. But the noise had a way of finding her. One morning, as she bent to retrieve the newspaper from the porch, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, waving from across the street. The woman's face was glowing, eyes wide as though she had just returned from a parade. "Mary," she called, "I saw Daniel on the news last night. What a speech, what a good man you raised." Mary blinked. "News?" "Yes, Channel 8. He was at that charity dinner, talking about his childhood. Said his mother was a school teacher who worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything so he could succeed. Brought the house down, Mary." Everyone applauded. "He's quite the storyteller." Mary smiled faintly, forcing gratitude to her lips, but her chest tightened. She went inside, shut the door, and switched on the television. After flipping through channels, she found the rerun. There was Daniel, handsome in a dark suit, Sophie at his side, cameras flashing like fireworks. He stood at a podium, voice firm, confident. "I grew up with very little," he said, pausing just long enough to let sympathy build. "I had a mother who believed in me. She gave up her own ambitions so that I could chase mine. She sold heirlooms, she worked late nights, she carried the burden of our home while my father was sick. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today." The crowd erupted in applause. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but not of pride. She waited for the next words, the ones that would surely come. My mother, Mary Thompson, deserves this recognition. A thank you, a gesture, even a nod. But Daniel never said her name. Instead, he transitioned into the foundation he and Sophie were launching. The Mercer Foundation for Educational Futures, he declared, dedicated to supporting students who need a chance. This is my way of giving back. The cameras zoomed in. Sophie slipped her hand into his, smiling as if she were the one who had written the sacrifices into their story. Mary sat frozen on the couch. She heard the applause, saw the confetti fall from the ceiling of the banquet hall on the screen. Yet within her living room there was only silence. Later that evening, Emily called. "Did you see Daniel's speech? Wasn't it beautiful?" Mary hesitated. Yes, it was moving. Emily's voice carried a hint of pride. "He's really making a name for himself, Mom. You should be proud." Mary wanted to scream, proud, proud that he erased me with a smile, proud that he used my life as a story without giving me a place in it, but she didn't. She simply said, "I suppose so." After hanging up, she found herself standing before the mantel again, staring at her husband's old watch, still frozen in time. She imagined what he might say if he were alive to hear it. "He's using your story, Mary, but he's not sharing your truth." 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. Thick paper, embossed with gold letters, the Mercer Foundation Gala, a night of legacy. Her name was not on the invitation. Daniel had sent it, of course, but it was addressed only to Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Mercer. Sophie's name gleamed beneath his, as though she were the architect of sacrifice, the quiet backbone behind the scenes. Mary's hands trembled as she held the envelope. She remembered the days when Daniel was 10 years old, clutching his spelling lists, begging her to quiz him just one more time before bed. She remembered staying up until dawn, grading her students' papers, and then rushing to pack his lunch. She remembered the weight of his hand in hers at Michael's funeral, when he was still young enough to seek comfort from his mother. Now, he sought comfort from cameras and applause from strangers who believed his rewritten story. The betrayal was not loud. It did not come with a slammed door or raised voices. It came in silence, her name absent, her presence erased, her life used as currency to buy his success. That night, Mary sat in the kitchen with the lights dimmed, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. She spread the invitation on the table like a contract she had never signed. She thought of what Emily had said about the house, what John had written in his email, what Daniel had spoken to the world. Piece by piece, they were dismantling her life, her home, her story, her very existence in the family narrative. Mary whispered into the empty room, "They've taken everything, even me." Her voice echoed back, a hollow confirmation. And for the first time in years, Mary felt something different from grief. She felt the stirring of anger, quiet but steady. Not the anger of a woman scorned, but the anger of a mother finally seeing that her sacrifices had been stolen, twisted, displayed as trophies without her name engraved. She folded the invitation, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it into the drawer. The cracks in her family had widened into a chasm, and she knew, though she could not yet imagine how, that one day the truth would have to come to light. Because a story stolen is still a story, and a mother erased is not erased forever. A week after the gala invitation arrived, Mary decided to take a train to Connecticut. She had not seen Emily in months, and despite the sting of Daniel's erasure, a part of her still longed for the comfort of her eldest child. Perhaps, she told herself, Emily would remind her that she was not entirely forgotten. The train ride was long, the windows framing bare winter trees rushing by. Mary held a small tin of lemon cookies in her lap, the same recipe Emily had loved as a girl. She remembered tiny hands dusted with flour, Emily licking the spoon when she thought her mother wasn't watching. Those were the memories Mary carried with her like fragile glass, hoping they would still mean something. When she arrived, Emily's house stood like a fortress of wealth. Stone pillars, manicured lawns, an iron gate that opened only after she pressed a buzzer and announced her name. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lilies and lemon polish, too perfect, too sharp. Emily greeted her with a quick hug. "Mom, you made it. Sorry about the mess. We've got some people coming over later." Mary glanced around. The rooms gleamed. There was no mess. She handed the tin of cookies to her daughter. I thought you'd like these, your favorite. Emily smiled politely but set the tin aside on a counter crowded with store-bought desserts wrapped in shiny packaging. Thanks, Mom. They sat in the living room, its white couches immaculate, the fireplace lit by a gas switch rather than wood and kindling. Emily perched upright, checking her phone between sentences. How have you been? Mary asked. Busy, Emily replied. Richard's company is expanding. The kids have activities every night. It's exhausting. She sighed as though she carried the weight of the world, though her diamond bracelet glittered under the chandelier light. Mary listened, nodding, offering the soft sounds of a mother who had always been a listener. But when she spoke of her own life, about the house, the garden, the photograph of her students, Emily's eyes glazed over. That's nice, Mom, she murmured, scrolling her screen. The sound of the front door opening drew Mary's attention. Richard entered tall, his tie loosened, his expression tired. He kissed Emily's cheek, glanced at Mary, and gave a polite nod. Mary, he said, good to see you. You're staying just for the afternoon, right? We've got investors coming for dinner. Mary swallowed. Of course. I'll head back before evening. Richard smiled thinly. Good, we just want to keep things smooth tonight. He disappeared upstairs without another word. The words lodged in Mary's chest like thorns. We just want to keep things smooth, as if her presence were a wrinkle in their fabric, an inconvenience to be managed. Emily tried to soften it. Don't mind him, Mom. He's just stressed. You know how business is. Mary nodded, though her heart ached. She wanted to tell Emily that her father had worked himself sick in business too, and yet he always made room for her. He never once suggested she was in the way. They ate a late lunch together, salads, light and tasteless compared to the warm meals Mary used to prepare. Emily spoke of vacation homes, of private schools, of schedules packed so tightly they left no space for spontaneity. Mary listened, but inside she felt herself shrinking. She was not a guest of honor here, she was a relic. Afterward, Mary rose to leave. Emily hugged her again, brief, distracted. We'll talk soon, she promised, though her eyes were already drifting back to her phone. On the train ride home, Mary held the untouched tin of lemon cookies. Emily hadn't offered them to her children. She hadn't even opened them. Mary stared out the window at the darkening sky, the reflection of her face ghostly against the glass. Invisible. That was the word that came to her. Not forgotten, not unloved in some abstract sense, but invisible in the very rooms she had once filled with her laughter, her care, her sacrifices. When she arrived home, the house greeted her like an old friend. The air smelled of wood polish and roses from the bush she had tended in the backyard. The walls, though aging, still seemed to recognize her. Mary placed the tin of cookies on the counter. She opened it, broke one in half, and ate it slowly, the sugar and lemon sharp on her tongue. She thought of Emily as a little girl, how her face had lit up at the very first bite years ago. Now her daughter hadn't even tasted them. Mary's eyes welled, but no tears fell. She sat at the table in the dim light and whispered into the quiet, I am still here. Even if they don't see me, I am still here. Her words echoed, stronger than she expected. Yet deep inside, a fear stirred. If her own children could erase her presence at their tables, how much longer before they erased her entirely? From their lives, from their story, from their memory. The morning after her visit to Emily's, Mary woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The sky outside was gray, the kind of gray that pressed down like a weight. She shuffled into the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and sat at the table, staring at the unopened tin of lemon cookies. She felt small in her own home, as though even the walls might one day turn away from her, just as her children had. For a moment she thought of Daniel's speech again, the way he had paraded her sacrifices in front of strangers without once speaking her name. Then Emily's distracted smile. Richard's cold reminder to leave before dinner. The word that haunted her now, invisible. She sighed, reached for the morning mail, and found a thick envelope tucked between the usual bills and advertisements. The return address read, Eastbrook High Alumni Committee. Curious, she tore it open. Inside was a letter, printed on formal stationery, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom in a familiar scrawl. Dear Mrs. Thompson, we are planning a reunion this spring, and many of your former students have asked if you might attend. Some of us have never forgotten the lessons you taught, not only about literature and algebra, but about resilience, kindness, and believing in ourselves when no one else did. If you can, please come. We would love to thank you properly. It was signed, with gratitude, James Carter. Class of '98. Mary blinked at the name. James had been one of her toughest cases. A boy from a broken home, always skipping homework, always scribbling in the margins of his notebook instead of listening. She had spent long hours after school tutoring him, encouraging him, refusing to give up even when other teachers said he would never make it. She read the note twice, then a third time. The words warmed her like sunlight breaking through the gray. We would love to thank you properly. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. Mary answered, expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a deep, confident voice said, "Mrs. Thompson, this is James Carter. I hope you remember me." She laughed softly. "James Carter, of course I do. You were the one who always wrote song lyrics in the middle of math class." He chuckled. "Guilty, but you made me believe those lyrics mattered. You told me words had power, even if I didn't know how to use them yet. You probably don't know this, but I became a songwriter. Nashville, Los Angeles, the whole dream. And I just wanted to tell you it's because of you." Mary sat down heavily in her chair. "Because of me? Yes, you saw me when nobody else did." His voice softened. "I'll never forget that, and I'm not the only one. At the reunion, we're all talking about how you were the reason we made it through. We'd be honored if you'd come." Mary pressed the phone closer, her throat tight. "James, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied simply. "Say yes, because you deserve to hear what we've all carried in our hearts since high school." After the call, Mary sat for a long while in silence, tears sliding down her cheeks. She hadn't realized how desperately she had needed those words, "You saw me." Her own children no longer seemed to see her, but here was proof that her life had left marks, real ones, etched deep in the lives of others. She pulled out the old photo from the window ledge, the one of her students holding the "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson" banner. She traced the smiling faces with her finger, remembering their names, their stories, the futures she had prayed they might have. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I wasn't invisible after all." That night, she dreamed of her husband, Michael. In the dream, he was young again, his hair dark, his smile wide. They were dancing in their living room, his hand on her waist, her head against his chest. The record player spun a slow tune. He whispered, "See, Mary? They remember. What you gave wasn't wasted." When she woke, the rain had stopped. The morning light poured through the curtains, softer, gentler. For the first time in weeks, she felt something stir in her chest, not just pain, not just anger, but a small, steady ember of hope. The next day, she went to the attic. Dust clung to the boxes stacked against the walls. She pulled one open and found the old lesson plans she had saved, the notes from students, the drawings they had given her. She found Emily's crayon sketch from first grade, Mary with a crown on her head labeled "My Hero." Her eyes blurred. When did they forget that I was once their hero? She gathered the papers and spread them across the dining table. She wanted to remember that she had once mattered, not just as a mother, but as a woman, a teacher, a soul who left imprints. And as she sat surrounded by proof of her life's worth, a thought whispered in her mind, "If strangers could honor me, why couldn't my own children?" It was a question she could no longer ignore. Mary had almost convinced herself that the letter from James Carter was enough to carry her through the rest of the week. Enough to remind her that she had once mattered, that she still did. But life has a way of testing new hope. Sometimes it doesn't knock, it barges in uninvited. On Friday afternoon, as she came back from the market with a bag of apples and a loaf of bread, she noticed an envelope wedged awkwardly into her mailbox. Unlike the alumni letter, this one was not addressed to her. It bore Daniel's name, though the postmark had been misprinted and delivered to her address, his childhood home. Her first instinct was to put it aside for him, but then she saw the return address, Mercer Foundation offices, downtown. Something in her stomach twisted. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Inside was a set of forms, grant applications, financial disclosures, and a draft of a speech for an upcoming board review. And at the top of the letterhead, bold and unmistakable, were the words, "Inspired by the legacy of Mary Thompson." Mary froze. She read the draft once, then again, her hands trembling. The text painted a picture of a woman, an archetype more than a mother. "A humble teacher who gave everything," it said. A woman whose sacrifices taught her son the meaning of perseverance and ambition, a model of resilience whose legacy now fuels the Mercer Foundation. Her name was there. Her life was there, but not as truth, not as presence. She had been transformed into a brand, a story Daniel could market, a relic polished for the benefit of strangers. Mary sank into her chair, the apples rolling onto the floor. For years she had wondered if her children remembered her sacrifices. Now she saw they hadn't forgotten, they had twisted them. That evening, Emily called again. Her voice was brisk. "Mom, have you signed the documents about the house yet?" Mary clutched the envelope in her lap. "What documents?" "I sent them through last week. Daniel probably has a copy too. We've found a buyer already. It's a good offer. It would secure things for you." Mary's heart pounded. "You made arrangements without me?" Emily sighed as though speaking to a child. "It's for your own good. You can't maintain that house anymore. It's time to move on." Mary closed her eyes. Her own children were not simply ignoring her. They were erasing her voice from every decision, reshaping her life without her consent, using her story to fuel Daniel's rise while stripping her of the one thing she still owned, her home. When she hung up, she sat in silence, staring at the papers. She thought of her husband's voice, years ago, warning her, "Never let anyone else tell your story, Mary. It's yours to keep." The following morning, she decided she needed to see for herself. She dressed carefully, put on her scarf, and took the bus downtown. The Mercer Foundation occupied a gleaming building of glass and steel. Through the lobby windows, she could see banners advertising their mission, empowering tomorrow through education. Beneath the slogan, Daniel's smiling face beamed back at her. She stepped inside, her shoes clicking against the marble. A receptionist greeted her politely. "Good morning. How may I help you?" Mary's voice was steady, though her chest was tight. "I'm here to see Daniel Mercer. I'm his mother." The receptionist smiled awkwardly. "I'll check if he's available." She dialed the phone, whispered into the receiver, then glanced at Mary with hesitation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer isn't in today." But even as she spoke, Mary saw movement at the end of the hall. Daniel himself emerging from a conference room, Sophie at his side. He was laughing, his arm brushing hers, a stack of files in his hand. Mary's breath caught. She waited for him to notice her, but when his eyes finally met hers, he did not smile. Instead, he stiffened, whispered something to Sophie, and turned away. It was Sophie who approached. Her heels struck the marble like small hammers. "Mary," she said, her tone polite but sharp, "you really shouldn't be here. Daniel's very busy." Mary lifted her chin. "I saw the papers. My name is being used for this foundation." Sophie smiled thinly. "Of course, it's a tribute. You should be honored." "A tribute without permission?" Mary's voice cracked. "Without acknowledgement?" Sophie's eyes hardened. "It's business, Mary. Your story sells. It makes people feel good about giving money. That's what matters. And honestly," she leaned closer, "it's not as if you're using it." Mary's knees trembled, but she steadied herself against the counter. The words burned, "Not as if you're using it." As if her life, her sacrifices, her very identity were products left on a shelf for Daniel and Sophie to package and profit from. She stepped back, her voice shaking but clear. "You've stolen from me." Sophie shrugged, her smile never wavering. "Think of it as legacy. Isn't that what mothers want, to be remembered?" Mary turned and walked out of the building, her scarf trailing behind her like a flag of surrender she had never agreed to raise. That night she could not sleep. The house creaked in the wind, the shadows stretched long across her bedroom. She rose and went to her husband's desk, where she kept the letters, the photographs, the old lesson plans. She spread them across the wood like evidence. "They've taken my name," she whispered to the empty room, "but not my story, that's still mine." She thought of her students, of James Carter's call, of the way he had said, "You saw me," and suddenly she realized her children were not only erasing her, they were underestimating her. They believed she would be quiet, compliant, invisible, but she had been invisible long enough. Mary gathered the letters and placed them in a folder. She did not know yet what she would do. But she knew this: she would not let her story be stolen again. The betrayal was no longer silent. It was loud, it was clear, and it was enough to ignite something in her she had nearly forgotten: strength. Mary had not felt this restless in years. She spent that night pacing the kitchen, the folder of papers clutched against her chest as if they were the last fragments of her life. The clock ticked past midnight, then one, then two. Still, her mind refused to quiet. She had lived 60 years believing patience was her best armor. When her husband was sick, she had waited through long nights in hospital corridors, trusting that endurance itself could heal. When her children were small, she had waited for them to grow, sacrificing her dreams for theirs. Even now, she had waited silently as they made decisions about her home, her life, her very name. But waiting had only made her invisible. At dawn, Mary rose from her chair, weary but resolute. She brewed coffee strong enough to steady her trembling hands. And then, for the first time in her life, she opened her husband's old metal filing cabinet, the one she had kept locked since his passing. Inside were documents from their early years, deeds, tax papers, the loan agreements they had signed to put Daniel through college, proof of every sacrifice. She spread them on the table beside the alumni letters, the student notes, the photograph of her class. Piece by piece, she began assembling her life's record, not for nostalgia this time, but as evidence. The next step was harder. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she had scribbled in the margin of James Carter's reunion invitation. He had written, "If you ever need anything, call me." He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right?" Mary hesitated, then spoke. "James, I need advice, maybe more than advice." She told him everything, the house, the speeches, the foundation using her name without acknowledgement. Her voice shook, but she did not hide. She laid her truth bare. There was a long silence when she finished. Then James said, his tone steady, "You need someone in your corner, someone who knows the law. I have a friend, Jennifer. She's an attorney. I'll call her tonight. Will you meet with her?" Mary closed her eyes, relief and fear mingling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." 2 days later, she found herself sitting in a quiet cafe across from Jennifer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a stack of legal pads at her side. Jennifer listened intently, barely interrupting as Mary explained her story. When Mary finished, Jennifer tapped her pen against the table. "Mrs. Thompson, what your son has done, using your name, your likeness, your story, without your consent, that's exploitation. If the foundation has financial gain tied to your identity, you have rights." Mary's hands shook around her teacup. "But he's my son." Jennifer's gaze softened. "That doesn't make it right. Sometimes family can wound us deeper than strangers. You don't have to destroy him, but you have the right to reclaim your voice." Mary nodded slowly. For the first time, someone had given her language for what she felt, exploitation. It wasn't just hurt feelings, it was theft. Jennifer slid her a card. "Start collecting. Every speech, every document, every reference to your name. If they're using your story, we'll prove it." Mary tucked the card into her scarf pocket. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm. That night, she sat by her desk with her laptop open. She searched Daniel's foundation online. Article after article praised his humble beginnings, his selfless mother, his legacy of sacrifice. Some even showed photos of her taken from old yearbooks or borrowed from the family albums she hadn't realized Sophie had scanned. Mary copied everyone. She saved them in folders, organized by date, by event, by quote. With each click, her anger hardened into resolve. She wasn't simply collecting proof. She was reclaiming the story piece by piece. But strength, Mary discovered, also came from unlikely places. A few days later, she received another letter in the mail, this one from a former student named Priya. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I heard about the reunion and I just wanted you to know I work at a nonprofit now. I became who I am because you believed I could. Please come. We want to see you to honor you." Mary held the letter to her chest. She realized she was no longer waiting for her children to see her. Others already did. And if strangers could recognize her, then surely one day her own children would have to face what they had erased. The turning point came when Emily visited again, this time unannounced. She walked in briskly, her heels echoing against the wood floor. "Mom, we've finalized the papers for the house. You just need to sign." Mary folded her hands over the folder on the table. "I'm not signing, Emily." Emily frowned. "Mom, don't be stubborn. This is what's best." Mary stood, her back straighter than Emily had seen in years. "Best for who? For you? For Daniel? For Sophie? I am not a burden to be managed. This house is mine, and my story is mine. You will not take either from me." Emily blinked, taken aback. For a moment, her polished composure faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if realizing she had underestimated her mother. Mary's voice did not waver. "I've been quiet too long, but no more." That evening, as the sun set outside her window, Mary returned to the folder of evidence. She added Emily's unsigned papers to the stack. She looked at the photograph of her students, the letter from James, the card from Jennifer. For the first time in months, she felt her heart steady. She was not powerless, she was not invisible. She whispered into the quiet room almost like a prayer. "They will hear me, they will know me, not as a story they can sell, but as their mother, as myself." And with that, Mary Thompson, 60 years old, widow, teacher, mother, gathered the strength of decades of sacrifice and sorrow and began the slow, deliberate work of standing up for her name, for her home, for her truth. The first cold winds of November carried with them a brittle edge, rattling the windows of Mary's old house. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her shoulders as she set the dining table, not for supper, but for a meeting. The table had held decades of family dinners, board games, late-night homework sessions. Tonight it would hold something heavier, truth. Mary had invited her children, not gently, not in her usual tentative tone, but firmly. She had called each one, her voice clear, leaving no room for refusal. "We need to talk," she said, "all of us, about the house, about the foundation, about me." Emily hesitated before agreeing. John grumbled about work but eventually confirmed he'd fly in, and Daniel, his sigh crackled through the line. "If this is about money, Mom, it's about my name," Mary interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. There had been silence on the other end, then a clipped, "Fine, we'll be there." By 6 o'clock, the children arrived one by one. Emily first, dressed in her usual sleek blazer, clutching a leather folder. Then John, weary-eyed from travel, his phone buzzing with messages even as he hugged his mother quickly, distractedly. Finally, Daniel and Sophie, their entrance brisk, Sophie's perfume filling the hallway before she even spoke. They gathered in the living room, the air tight with unspoken tension. Mary took her place at the head of the table, the same seat she had held for birthdays and Christmas mornings. But tonight her posture was different, straight-backed, unyielding. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady. "I know you're busy, but this conversation cannot wait." Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Mom, if this is about the house—" "It's about more than the house," Mary cut in. She laid the folder on the table, thick with documents. "It's about what you've been doing with my life, my sacrifices, my story." Daniel scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Mom, you're overreacting. The foundation honors you. It's meant to celebrate what you gave." "Celebrate?" Mary's voice rose. "Daniel, you've used my name in speeches, in papers, in advertisements, without once asking my permission, without once acknowledging me directly. You parade my sacrifices to strangers, but erase me in my own family." Sophie's lips curved into a tight smile. "It's branding, Mary. People want a story, you should be flattered." Mary's eyes narrowed. "Flattered. That my life has been turned into a slogan? That my name is good enough for your donors, but not good enough to be spoken at your table?" John shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his siblings. "Mom, maybe you're taking it too personally. It's business." Mary turned to him, her voice trembling but fierce. "Business? I sold my mother's ring so you could go to college, John. I worked nights so Emily could have new clothes for school. I gave up my degree so Daniel could have a chance. That wasn't business. That was my life, and you've treated it like a product." Silence fell. Emily's hand hovered over her folder, but she didn't open it. Mary reached into her own and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been keeping records, every article, every speech. Every time my name was used without my voice. I have it all, and I've spoken with an attorney." Daniel's face reddened. "You what?" "I have rights." Mary continued. "You cannot use my likeness, my story, for profit without my consent, and if you continue, I will stop you." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then Sophie laughed, low and sharp. "You wouldn't dare? You'd ruin your own son's career?" Mary met her gaze evenly. "I didn't ruin it. He did when he decided his mother was a tool instead of a person." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "I built that foundation." Mary's voice cracked, but it carried. "You built it on me, on my sacrifices, on my silence, and I will not be silent anymore." Emily finally spoke, her tone softer. Mom, maybe we didn't realize how deeply this hurt you. She looked at Daniel, then John. Maybe we all forgot what you gave, but Mom, suing your own children, isn't that too far? Mary's eyes glistened. Do you think I want that? Do you think I wanted this meeting? I only ever wanted to be part of your lives, to be seen, but you've treated me like I don't belong. You tried to take my home. You took my story. If standing up for myself means you call me cruel, then so be it, but I will not let you erase me. John put down his phone at last. His voice was quiet. She's right. Daniel turned on him. What? She's right, John repeated more firmly this time. I remember those nights. Mom working double shifts, Dad sick. We wouldn't have made it without her. And now we're pushing her out of her own house? Using her name like she's a ghost we own? It's wrong. For the first time, shame flickered across Emily's face. Sophie leaned toward Daniel, whispering something sharp, but Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother, then at the folder of evidence in front of her. His voice shook with anger. You don't understand what this will do, Mom. The board, the donors? I don't care about your donors, Mary said, her voice rising with a force that startled even her. I care about my dignity, about the truth, and I will not let you trade either for money. The confrontation stretched into silence. Mary's hands trembled, but she kept them flat against the table, steady. Her children looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, not as a burden, not as a story, but as the woman who had carried them, fed them, given everything so they could sit in this very room with the lives they had built. Finally, Mary stood. This house is mine, my story is mine, and from this day forward, I will decide how it is told. She gathered the papers back into the folder and pressed it to her chest. If you want me in your lives, you will see me as I am, not as a slogan, not as a transaction, but as your mother. She walked toward the door, leaving her children in stunned silence around the table that had once bound them together. For the first time in decades, Mary felt taller than her years, her steps sure. Her voice ringing in her ears like a bell long silenced. The showdown was over. But the battle for her dignity had only just begun. The night of the family meeting left the old house heavy with silence. After her children departed, some in anger, some in shame, Mary lingered in the living room, the folder of documents clutched in her lap. The house creaked as if it too had listened, as if it finally knew she would not surrender it so easily. Sleep was fitful. When dawn broke, she brewed coffee and opened her laptop. Messages buzzed her inbox. She had not expected what she saw. Several emails from James Carter. Mrs. Thompson, I heard about the Mercer Foundation gala. People are talking. They're saying Daniel has been misrepresenting his story. Some of us are ready to stand up for you if you'll allow it. Another email from Jennifer, the attorney. I've reviewed your documents. The case is strong. If they continue to use your likeness, we can file an injunction. But the bigger leverage is public opinion. When the truth comes out, Daniel won't have the power to silence you. Mary closed the laptop slowly. The world beyond her kitchen was already beginning to shift. Her truth was no longer just a private wound. It was becoming something larger. By midweek, the cracks in Daniel's image were showing. A news article appeared online. Is the Mercer Foundation story too good to be true? It questioned the narrative Daniel had spun, highlighting discrepancies between his speeches and official records. Donors began whispering, board members called for explanations. Daniel stormed into her house that Thursday unannounced. He slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Mom, what did you do? He shouted. Mary looked up from her knitting. I told the truth. His face was flushed. The press is all over me. The board is questioning my credibility. Do you realize what you've started? Mary laid her knitting aside, her voice calm. I didn't start this, Daniel. You did when you turned me into a ghost at your table, but a saint for your donors. You used me, and now you're angry because people finally see it. Sophie, who had followed him inside, crossed her arms. You're destroying your son's career. Do you want him to lose everything? Mary's gaze hardened. What I want is respect. If that costs Daniel his career, then perhaps his career wasn't built on respect to begin with. After they left, the phone rang. This time it wasn't family. It was a woman named Patricia, head of a non-profit education group. Mrs. Thompson, she said warmly, I know you don't know me, but I've admired your teaching legacy for years. We'd like to honor you at our upcoming conference. Keynote speaker, if you're willing, you don't have to tell Daniel's story, tell your own. Mary's breath caught. Keynote me? Yes, Patricia replied. People need to hear from women like you, the ones who sacrificed, who carried others, who still stand. Will you consider it? Mary pressed a hand to her chest. I'll think about it. When she hung up, she stared at the old photograph of her students on the windowsill. For years she had lived as though her voice belonged to her children alone. But now, strangers wanted to hear her, not Daniel's polished version. Hers, the following weekend, brought another ripple. Emily returned, this time without folders, without her polished armor. She sat at the kitchen table quietly, her eyes rimmed red. Mom, she whispered, I'm sorry. Mary blinked. For what? For all of it, the house, the way we've treated you. You were right. We've taken you for granted. I let Richard convince me you were a burden, but I see now you're not, you never were. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. She reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. I only ever wanted to be part of your lives, not your projects, not your transactions, just your mother. Emily nodded, her lips trembling. I know I forgot, but I don't want to forget anymore. It was not complete redemption, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled. Reports surfaced of mismanaged funds at the foundation. Sophie's sharp words, once rehearsed for cameras, cracked in interviews. Donors withdrew pledges. A board member resigned publicly, citing ethical concerns. For years, Mary had feared she was powerless. Now she saw her power clearly, not in revenge, but in truth. Truth had consequences, and those who built on lies eventually faced them. One evening, John called from Seattle. His voice was quieter than usual. Mom, he said, I've been thinking, you're stronger than I ever realized. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Work kept me blind. Mary smiled faintly. Thank you for saying that. I don't want to lose you, he added. Not to distance, not to pride. For the first time in years, Mary felt her middle child reaching back across the miles. The cracks in her family had not yet healed, but light was seeping through. The true test came when Daniel returned once more. This time he wasn't furious. He was pale, his voice subdued. They're pushing me out, he admitted, sitting heavily at her table. The board, the donors, Sophie, she's already looking for another job. Mom, I could lose everything. Mary studied him. For a moment, she saw the boy he once was, the boy with scraped knees, the boy who cried when his father was in the hospital. Her heart ached. But she remembered Jennifer's words, you have rights. Don't let family guilt erase them. You built everything on me, she said quietly. And when I asked for nothing but recognition, you shut me out. Do you see now what that cost? Daniel's shoulders sagged. I do, I just don't know how to fix it. Mary placed a hand on the folder beside her. The only way forward is honesty. Tell the truth to the board, to the donors, to your siblings, and to me. He looked at her, his eyes glistening. If I do, will you stand with me? Mary hesitated, then shook her head gently. No, Daniel, this is your path. I've already stood for you your whole life. Now you must stand for yourself. And maybe if you do, one day I can stand beside you again, but not for lies. That night, Mary sat alone in the living room, the weight of her choices heavy but clear. She could forgive, perhaps, in time, but forgiveness did not mean silence. Forgiveness did not mean erasure. She looked at the invitation from Patricia's nonprofit still lying on the counter. Slowly, with hands steadier than she'd known in years, she picked up the phone and dialed. Patricia, she said when the voice answered, I'll do it, I'll speak. And with those words, Mary felt something shift inside her. For the first time in 6 decades, she wasn't standing behind anyone, not her husband, not her children, not her students. She was standing in her own light. The auditorium was packed. Rows upon rows of teachers, students, donors, and community members filled the seats, the soft hum of anticipation rising as the lights dimmed. On the stage stood a podium, simple but dignified, with a banner above it. Voices of education, honoring the ones who gave everything. Mary waited backstage, her hands folded over her scarf. 60 years of silence, of sacrifice, of being pushed aside, all of it had led to this moment. Patricia appeared beside her, beaming. They're ready for you, she whispered. Mary stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the stage floor. The room erupted into applause, not the polite kind reserved for ceremony, but the raw, genuine kind that shook the walls. She blinked under the bright lights, her heart swelling. For once, they weren't clapping for Daniel or Sophie or some polished version of her story. They were clapping for her. She reached the podium, steadied her breath, and began. I was told not long ago that I didn't belong at my own table, that my sacrifices were useful for speeches but not for love, that my story could be borrowed, branded, and sold without me. But tonight I stand here as myself, Mary Thompson, a mother, a teacher, a woman who gave everything she had, not for recognition, but for family, for students, for hope. And yet, recognition matters, not for pride, but for truth. Because when we erase the ones who carried us, we lose more than memories, we lose our foundation. She paused. The room was utterly still. Faces leaned forward, waiting. When I look back, Mary continued, her voice clear and firm, I don't measure my life in money or titles. I measure it in the nights I stayed awake helping a child with homework. In the ring I sold so my son could apply to college. In the jacket I saved for so my middle boy wouldn't feel invisible at school. In the classroom where students like James Carter found the courage to write their own stories. Sacrifice is not weakness. It is strength disguised as quiet. And mothers, fathers, teachers, so many of us live unseen. But tonight, I want you to hear me clearly. Being unseen does not mean being unworthy. Applause rippled again, louder this time, echoing against the ceiling. Mary took a breath, her voice softening. I forgive my children, even if I cannot forget, because forgiveness is the gift I choose for myself, but I also choose truth. I choose to say my name, my story, out loud. And I hope you too will honor the unseen people in your lives, the ones who built your tables, even if they were asked to sit outside them. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, and in that silence she imagined Michael, her late husband, smiling in the front row. She imagined her younger self, exhausted but unyielding, whispering hold on a little longer. And she imagined her students, their young faces still cheering her on. Mary opened her eyes again. This is my legacy, not money, not property, but love, perseverance, and the refusal to let silence erase me. The audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation thundered across the room, wave after wave of applause. Tears filled Mary's eyes as she stepped back from the podium. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was undeniable. Later, as she left the stage, a group of young teachers rushed up to her. One of them, a woman no older than 30, held Mary's hands tightly. You've given me courage, she said, her voice breaking. I was ready to give up, but now I won't. Mary smiled, squeezing her hands. Don't let anyone steal your story, she whispered. It's yours to tell. That night, back in her quiet home, Mary set the program from the event on her mantel, beside her husband's old watch and the photograph of her students. The house no longer felt like a burden to defend. It felt like a monument to a life lived fully, scars and all. Her children's journeys were not finished. There were still bridges to rebuild, wounds to heal. But Mary no longer waited for their approval. She had her own voice now, her own table. And she knew when her granddaughter looked back one day, she would not see an invisible woman. She would see the grandmother who stood tall, even when others tried to shrink her. Mary sat in her armchair, the evening quiet around her, and whispered into the stillness, I am here. I have always been here. Dear readers, thank you for walking with Mary through her journey. Stories like hers remind us that behind every closed door there is a heart that longs to be seen, a sacrifice that deserves recognition, a legacy that cannot be erased. I wish you health, peace, and the warmth of family that sees you, values you, and cherishes you for who you are. May your homes be filled with understanding, your tables with love, and your lives with the dignity of being remembered rightly. With gratitude, the author.